Good morning, beautiful people. Hope you're having a great day so far. Just absolutely killed an upper day. Oh my God. Dear Lord. Man, I love upper day. I'll tell you what, I'm sure if you've watched literally any of my videos, you know that I love upper day, but it is truly my favorite day. And nothing will ever change that, I don't think. I mean, I sure as hell it's not gonna be leg day, but trust me, anyone who is over 6 feet tall and has long ass femurs, you'll understand why I don't like leg day. Anyways, leg day is not the topic of today's video. In fact, we're going to be talking about volume, specifically how many sets should you be doing per muscle group per week? How should you be counting these sets, etc. Well, the first thing is essentially most of this data is going to be coming from most of my statements are going to be based off of the Schoenfeld meta-analysis and the meta-regression from Pelland, which actually was just published finally. The preprint's been out for a year, almost 2 years. The preprint has been out, and this thing's been in peer review, which is the beauty of the modern era, right? We don't have to wait for data like we used to. But anyways, that's besides the point. Let's get into the meat. So how many sets should you do? Well, here's the issue, right? The Pelland meta will say, and specifically we'll talk about hypertrophy, because the Pelland meta says that for hypertrophy, you're gonna want to do at least 10 to 12 sets. And upwards of, essentially even up to 42. They found diminishing returns after about 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. And I guess first we should define how they defined sets and how sets are defined in the literature, specifically if you guys want to do any of your own research. So it's almost always going to be defined as fractional sets. So what is a fractional set? Well, that's where the prime mover is going to get essentially one arbitrary unit of hypertrophy. So let's take a chest press, for example, right? I'm doing a bench. My chest is going to get 1 unit of hypertrophy. So if I do 1 set of bench press, that's 1 set of chest. But my anterior delts and my triceps are also going to get a half a unit of hypertrophy. And when they did this meta-regression, which the only difference between a meta-analysis and a meta-regression is they're looking within groups, within studies, as opposed to just the different studies. There's really not a huge difference, but it does matter. So what they did is they tried to do their models, their statistical models, their best fit lines with traditional sets, just straight sets. So only counting 1 for chest. So with our chest press example, that would just be 1 set for chest, nothing for triceps, nothing for anterior delts. And that didn't really fit the data as good as fractional sets. So what this means for us is, yes, of course there's going to be some stimulus involved with doing a chest press with your triceps. Your triceps are involved. There's elbow flexion happening. There's shoulder flexion happening. So your front delts are going to be active. It's just like how in, let's say, a squat is going to be mainly your quads, depending on how you set it up, mainly your quads, but your glutes are also going to get some stimulus, so are your adductors. And in a RDL or an SLDL, you're going to have your adductor magnus is going to play a huge part, and your glutes are going to play a huge part. And in a hip thrust, your glutes are of course the prime mover, but your quads are also going to get some stimulus. So you get my point. Essentially, they have to quantify the amount of stimulus that you're getting from these secondary muscles. And the easiest way to do it, the most practical way in the literature, and that's the other thing that people don't understand a lot about research, is that they have to be practical with their sort of recommendations just as much as they have to be accurate. Because if they could technically really drill in and find you get 0.223 arbitrary units of hypertrophy for your triceps in every bench press, but that's not necessarily the most practical, because it's also going to be individualized, right? It depends on the specific person and their movement patterns, how trained they are, especially how trained they are in said exercise. Because as we know, the more you do a specific movement, your brain gets more efficient at doing said movement. You have reductions in antagonist coactivation. So the one study that we have looking at activation during a shoulder press versus a lateral raise, the anterior delts are active in both. Lateral delts or the medial delt is active in both. But then you also have the posterior, your rear delts, are active in a shoulder press. Now, this doesn't really make sense because it's the antagonist to your front delt. But that's because you have antagonist coactivation, right? But this decreases as you get more trained and as you learn a movement. That's why for some people, if you've been doing dumbbell bench press for 7 years, like if you watch Ronnie Coleman, the old videos of him doing dumbbell bench press, it is like pristine form. He almost has a fixed arm pad. But if you do it, or if I haven't done dumbbell bench press in over 3 years. So if I went and did a dumbbell bench press, I would be wobbling everywhere. That would not just be chest, right? I would have a ton of activation everywhere else. But as I got better, my brain would make the movement pattern more efficient, and it would become more of just a chest movement. So all of this to say that we have stimulus that's happening from secondary muscle groups, and they decided, the researchers, that fractional fit the data the best. So this is where I tend to disagree. Ooh, I know, scary, but hear me out. They did not account for, this wasn't resistance trained individuals. Okay, this was just, they were just looking, did they measure volume, and did they measure strength, and did they measure hypertrophy? They didn't specifically. There was other inclusion criteria, like the study had to be at least 4 weeks long, but being resistance trained was not one of them. Now, I think this is an important caveat, because specifically for the fact that they used fractional sets, because a beginner or an intermediate doing a chest press will get a lot of triceps stimulation from it, and most likely quite a bit of triceps growth. However, a very resistance trained person who really only, and that's because when you first start, you have your type 1 fibers and your type 2 fibers. You can split your type 2 into type 2A and type 2X, but that doesn't really matter for the context of this conversation. When you have an untrained person, they're mostly going to be growing their type 1 fibers. These are your slow twitch. These have less room to grow, and they recover faster. So and they are also lower on the motor unit recruitment pool. So essentially, all that means is it takes less sort of neural drive, less electricity from your brain. Your brain sends electric signals, and that's how your muscles contract. It turns into a chemical process. That's what people say when they're saying excitation, contraction, coupling. Because 9 times out of 10 they're talking about excitation, contraction, coupling failure, and cross-bridging. But that's how cross-bridges form, is electrical signal from your brain turns into a chemical signal at the muscle cell. So you only have a certain amount of electricity that you can send from your brain. And these type 1 fibers, they don't need a ton of electricity to be activated, to turn on. Because we have the all or nothing principle as well. So when the muscle is either contracted or it's not. And a fiber specifically. Or a motor unit, I guess. And when you are taking this into account, right, it makes sense, because that's why, if I go to pick up a cup of coffee and take a drink, I'm not going to activate my type 2 fibers that can produce a shit ton of force and smack my coffee into my face. I'm going to activate my type 1. Just like with walking. With walking, I'm going to activate my type 1s. because on the other side of the equation is the recovery side. So type 1 fibers have more mitochondria. This means that they can clear calcium ions a lot more efficiently because calcium ions are required to contract a muscle. However, they also cause a bunch of problems when they're there. They basically just go in and wreak havoc. And so that's what your mitochondria are for, are to clear them from the muscle cells, from the sarcoplasm. Now, this process, your type 2 fibers are not as good at it because they're less mitochondria. They have a smaller mitochondrial density, so just less mitochondria inside of the cells. And all of this to say, man, I'm really going off on a tangent here, but all of this to say that your type 1 fibers they recover faster, and they don't really take a lot of neural drive to turn on. Right? This is how we have Henneman's size principle, which is where the larger the fiber, the more effort, thus the more electricity you're gonna have to send from your brain. The more neural drive, central motor command, as we call it, from the motor cortex. So you're gonna have to send more central motor command to get these type 2 fibers to activate. And that makes sense. Like I said, a cup of coffee, remember, you don't want to activate your big fibers that can produce a bunch of force, because you don't want to shove your coffee into your face. You don't want to you don't want to be trying to walk and spring out of action, you know. So an untrained lifter has they're mainly going to be growing their type 1 fibers. And like I said, these don't take a lot of central motor command to grow. So in this bench press example, your triceps are probably going to grow when you're untrained from just doing a bench press, at least the medial and lateral heads. Long head suffers from active insufficiency, but I can talk about that in a later video. That's not the topic. And I've been on too many rants already. So all of this to say, I disagree. I don't think that fractional sets are the best way to go about things, because when we look at the hypertrophy, here's my other problem with the data. The first one is that they use fractional sets. The second one is, I don't like that they congregated trained and untrained subjects. And I also don't like that so this is a very hard thing with exercise science when they're measuring hypertrophy. All of our ways of measuring hypertrophy right now, we can't tell the difference between myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is actually myofibrillar addition, which is the one that we want. That's adding new myofibrils, that's getting bigger. The good way, adding more contractile proteins. The other way is sarcoplasmic, which is more sarcoplasm, so muscle cells essentially just swell up, and edema. So we can't really tell the difference between if you got bigger, if you added more muscle, or if you just are super swollen. And this swelling can stay for a while. I'm pretty sure it's up to a week. I haven't looked at a lot of the swelling studies, but the swelling can stay for a while, especially if you're doing a super high volume study or high volume program. So if you're doing, let's say 52 sets of biceps, I think that was the recent study that was ridiculous, or not super recent, but they did 52 sets a week of biceps, and they were like, wow, it caused a bunch of hypertrophy. No shit. They were so swollen, like, yeah, I bet. And the thing is, people then go, well, why shouldn't I just train with high volume so I can get swollen? That's a one and done effect. You can be swollen all the time, sure. But, so, for me, if the difference for strength and hypertrophy outcomes was so different, and it just doesn't make sense. Because you can get stronger without growing muscle. There's a lot of different ways that can happen. We already talked about one, that was that reduction in antagonist coactivation. You get more efficient at doing the movements. These are just motor learning, right? There's only there's 6 ways that you can get stronger, and only 2 of them are related to adding muscle. The first one is obviously myofibrillar hypertrophy, myofibrillar addition, so you're adding contractile proteins. And the second one is sarcomere addition, so that's stretch mediated hypertrophy. That's when you're adding new sarcomeres in a series, essentially stretching, and this can also relate in more costomeres, So you have more, when you're adding, if you think about it, with myofibrillar addition, right, we have all our fibers that are running this way, you're just adding more. And when you think about it as adding sarcomeres in a series, your myofibrillars are getting longer. So then the other ways, increases in lateral force transmission, your decreases in coactivation, antagonist coactivation. These are all different ways that you can get stronger without hypertrophying. But you can't. This is where I disagree with a lot of the outcome data. I've been called an outcome cell, and I'm not always an outcome cell because I disagree with some of the outcome data. There should not be a linear relationship, regardless of diminishing returns, of volume with hypertrophy. There just shouldn't. At some point, it's going to start working against you, and you're going to be too fatigued to do another session and grow more. And this is where I think edema is really flawing a lot of our hypertrophy research. And that's one of the biggest problems in hypertrophy research right now, is that we have no way of distinguishing, okay, what is new contractile protein and what is edema? But when you really just think about it, you cannot add contractile proteins without getting stronger. So how can you get stronger? How can you grow without getting stronger? If you're adding more contractile proteins, which means you can produce more force. The only possible explanation is that you're swelling. So when you look at there's two tables in this study. And the first one is the amount of sets that you need for hypertrophy. The second one is the amount of sets that you need for strength. And these, again, are fractional sets. So 10 to 20 for hypertrophy is 20 sets. If you're doing indirect, so if you're counting every set of pull downs, every row as biceps work, which the other problem with fractional sets is that it doesn't correlate to the data. It doesn't work. We have data looking at how much did your biceps grow from pull downs? How much did your biceps grow from rows? How much did your triceps grow from these presses? And it's not a lot. It's not as much. So just arbitrarily slapping a 0.5 on it and calling it good is lazy to me. And I think it's better to just not give them any credit. Because if you really are, I think it's better to just not give them any credit and then just work off the strength gains side of the equation when you're looking at the Pelland meta. So this means anywhere from 4 to 10 sets per week. We know that you can do as little as one set twice per week. One set twice per week will grow muscle if you're going to failure or close to it. One set twice per week will grow muscle. So if we know that's our minimum effective dose, then just build up from there. So my favorite way to look about this, and the way that I program for a lot of my clients, is let's take the minimum effective dose from the Pelland meta for strength, which is 4 sets. And they also did a frequency analysis, and they found that 3 is better than 2 on their line, but barely. So for the average person, and even if you're trying to maximize, 2 versus 3 is really not going to make that big of a difference, because we know frequency doesn't matter as much as everyone loves to tout it mattering. Yes, as long as you're doing it 2 times per week, the 2 versus 3 argument I'm not even going to get into, but likely, right, again, just from a logical standpoint, but not everything in physiology is logical. Everyone likes to simplify things way more than they should. But logically, yes, if I hit a muscle 3 times per week, I'm going to grow more than if I hit it 2 times a week. But then when we equate the volume, it really doesn't seem to do that. We need more studies around this. And that's a pretty common outcome with a lot of physiology. That's why there's so much debate in this, is because we just don't have the data to really back up the claims that people make. So anyways, back to the practicality of everything. You should start with your minimum effective dose, right? So first is pick your frequency. How often do you want to go in and hit a muscle? Well, first, I think it's more important, how often do you want to go to the gym? How much time do you have to go to the gym? Because if you're a degenerate like me and you're addicted, then the answer is, I want to go to the gym as much as possible. So I go 6 times a week. And people want to talk about central nervous system fatigue buildup. It's overrated as hell. You will be fine. You will be fine. This is where I, again, use my anecdotes of, I've been doing this for a long time and I haven't seen any progress difference between doing 6 days a week with 1 day of rest versus doing 4 days a week with, taking 3 days of rest. I've done full body every other day. I've done full body 3 times a week. And I really haven't seen, going across splits, the only big jump that I had was when I switched from a bro split, hitting things essentially once a week, to having a higher frequency. So, and I think anecdotes are important. I don't think they're everything, right? I think that, of course, scientific literature is going to be better than an anecdote, but an anecdote has value. It doesn't not have, at the end of the day, what is a study besides looking at a bunch of anecdotes? Obviously they're highly controlled, but you get my point. So I think that pick your frequency, 3 times a week. How many times can you go to the gym? How many times do you want to go to the gym? Then pick your frequency based off that. So if you want to go 4 days a week, okay, now you can pick your frequency. So this is where things, and how do you want your schedule to look like? Because full body every other day is a great split, but it alternates your schedule. And for some people that can be weird, right? Because you're not going on set days of the week. If you want to go 4 times a week, you can also do upper lower AB. And this again is another hot debate of, oh my God, I'm going to atrophy all my fibers if they're not shared among these 2 exercises. Like, the Beardsley and the Jake Dolce, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. They really are great at majoring in the minor, because hypertrophy is so forgiving. It honestly is, and that's what people don't want to hear. You've seen people get jacked, super jacked, off doing terrible programs. That's because hypertrophy is stupid forgiving. Anyways, pick your frequency, pick your split, and then for your volumes, start with as low as you can. So minimum effective dose, and then bring it up from there. Because if you start somewhere in the middle, then if you start with the lowest amount possible, you can only go up. But if you start at, let's say, so if you're doing 3 times a week, your minimum is probably going to be around 6 sets per week. It's kind of hard to 3 or 6 sets per week. But personally, I would opt for 6. So that's kind of your minimum effective dose. 6 sets per week of every muscle group, you can recover from that. And now, and I'm talking straight sets, again, not fractional. And these, now you're gonna pick, okay, I have my 6 sets. Now you can just go up. If you're getting great stimulus and you wanna wait at least 6 weeks to get all of your neural adaptations in. And now after those 6 weeks, okay, every increase is coming you're pretty sure that it's all coming from hypertrophy. So now you can just go up and assess. So add 1 set. Pick whatever muscle group is your favorite. It should be the one at the top of your split, the first thing that you're hitting. Add 1 set and assess. Okay, take 2 weeks. This is where you're gonna have to experiment on yourself. Take 2 weeks and assess. Okay, am I still progressing? Yeah. All right. Now, do you want to add another set to that? Maybe. Or do you want to add another set somewhere else? So that is the approach that I would take for volume and frequency. This was a yap, and it was kind of off topic and kind of all over the place. But I hope y'all learned something. Love y'all. Peace out.